bride left by Millionaire, and years later, he sees her with quadruplets and takes her to court. Hello, welcome, enjoy, subscribe, and activate notifications. Samantha Blake stood before the full-length mirror, her wedding gown shimmering in the soft amber glow of the suite. She adjusted the lace veil for what felt like the 100th time, each movement more tentative than the last. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. 11:30 a.m. The ceremony was set to begin in 30 minutes. Her heart raced with excitement, nerves, and love. Today was the day she would become Mrs. Jonathan Carter, the wife of the wealthiest man in Boston. It was supposed to be perfect, but then the phone rang. Samantha's heart skipped a beat as she turned to pick it up, a smile still playing on her lips. Hello? Her voice was soft, trembling slightly. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. Samantha. Jonathan's voice was cold, distant. I'm not coming. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She felt the air leave her lungs, her heart squeezing painfully in her chest. What? She whispered, the single word drenched in disbelief. It's over. I can't go through with it. I need to focus on the company right now. You'll understand someday. With that, the line went dead. The phone slipped from her fingers, crashing onto the floor as she stared blankly at her reflection. A bride without a groom, a love story without a happy ending. As the minutes ticked by, Samantha realized this wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the beginning of a battle she never saw coming. Samantha's world shattered that day, leaving her lost in a haze of grief and disbelief. The lavish hotel room, once a testament to Jonathan's wealth and status, felt cold and empty as she stood alone, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been the happiest day of her life. As her vision blurred with unshed tears, she yanked off her veil and flung it aside, the delicate lace crumpling on the floor, a symbol of all the promises Jonathan had just broken. In the following days, news of the wedding cancellation spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed of Jonathan Carter's last-minute decision, painting Samantha as the abandoned fiancée left to pick up the pieces. Paparazzi hounded her, flashing cameras capturing every moment of her heartbreak as she left the penthouse they once shared. But Samantha refused to crumble. With no job, no connections, and nowhere to go, she packed up her things and disappeared from the high society world she'd once been part of. She rented a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of the city. It was a stark contrast to the luxury she was used to, but it was hers, free from Jonathan's shadow. One morning, about a month after the disastrous non-wedding, she sat in her tiny bathroom, staring down at a small plastic stick. Her hands trembled as she watched a second line slowly appear. Pregnant. Her heart dropped, and then the shock turned to something else. Panic, confusion, hope. She couldn't call Jonathan. She wouldn't, after what he'd done. After how easily he had walked away without a backward glance. There was no way she'd let him back into her life. He didn't deserve to know. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Samantha's small frame swelled with life. 4 lives, as it turned out, quadruplets. She could hardly believe it when the doctor told her, his voice tinged with awe. How am I going to do this? She whispered, cradling her belly as she sat in the darkened room of her tiny apartment one night. But she did. Samantha didn't just survive. She thrived for them. She worked 2 jobs, piecing together a life for herself and her children. Jack, James, Jake, and Jesse. 4 tiny miracles that filled her world with love and laughter. As the quadruplets grew, so did Samantha's resolve. Every milestone, every first word, every giggle, every step strengthened her belief that she'd made the right choice. Jonathan would never be part of their lives. He didn't deserve to be. The boys had Jonathan's piercing blue eyes and his sandy blonde hair. Strangers would stop her on the street and comment on how identical they looked, how striking their resemblance was. And every time, Samantha's heart would ache just a little. It was as if Jonathan was there in every smile, every mischievous glance. By the time the boys turned 3, Samantha had settled into a routine. She worked at a small marketing firm during the day, and in the evenings, she freelanced as a graphic designer, squeezing in the work after the boys went to bed. Money was tight, but she made it work. There was no other choice. But everything changed one sunny afternoon when Samantha took the boys to the park. They were playing on the swings, their laughter ringing through the air, when Samantha felt a prickle of awareness at the back of her neck. She turned, her breath catching in her throat. Standing just a few feet away, watching her boys with an expression she couldn't quite read, was Jonathan. The world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. He looked different, older, sharper. His suit was immaculate, his hair neatly combed back, but there was something in his eyes, something vulnerable and raw. "Samantha," he murmured, taking a hesitant step forward. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. She instinctively moved in front of the quadruplets, shielding them with her body. Jonathan's gaze shifted to the four boys, his face paling. "Are they?" He couldn't finish the question, but Samantha saw the moment the realization hit him. His mouth dropped open slightly, and for a second, he looked like a man completely lost. "They're not yours," Samantha lied, the words spilling out before she could stop them. But Jonathan wasn't fooled. She could see it in his eyes. The way they darted between her and the boys, taking in every detail, every familiar trait. He took another step closer, his hands clenched at his sides. "Samantha, I need to know," he pleaded, his voice low and urgent. "Are they mine?" She lifted her chin, fighting to keep her expression blank. "It doesn't matter, Jonathan. You made your choice years ago. We don't need you." And then she turned, calling out to the boys in a bright, shaky voice. "Come on, guys, it's time to go home." They ran to her, their little hands reaching up to grab hers. Jonathan stood frozen, his gaze following them as they walked away. And as Samantha glanced back over her shoulder, she saw something flicker in his eyes, determination. He wasn't going to let them go. 2 weeks later, Jonathan showed up again. This time, he wasn't alone. He'd brought a lawyer. Samantha's heart sank as she read the papers he thrust into her hands. "Custody? You can't be serious," she whispered, staring up at him in disbelief. "I am," he replied quietly. "Samantha, I made a mistake. I know that now. But those boys, they deserve to know who their father is. I deserve a chance to be part of their lives." Her hands shook as she crumpled the papers. "You don't get to walk back into my life after everything you've done, after abandoning us." "I never knew," he shot back, his voice breaking. "I never knew about them, Samantha, because you never gave me a chance to tell you," she shouted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "You left, Jonathan. You left me with nothing. No money, no home, and 4 babies to raise alone." He flinched, but his expression hardened. "I'm not leaving again." The next few months were a blur of courtrooms and lawyers. Jonathan, true to his word, refused to back down. He showed up to every hearing, every meeting, fighting to prove he was serious about being in the boys' lives. And slowly, agonizingly, Samantha began to believe him. But trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. And as the tension between them simmered, Samantha couldn't help but wonder, was he really here for the boys, or was this just another one of his power plays? One evening, just as Samantha started to let her guard down, a tall, elegant woman stepped out of Jonathan's car, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Samantha's blood ran cold as she recognized her, Vivian, Jonathan's fiancée. But why was she here, smiling down at Samantha's children as if they were part of her perfect future? "Hello, Samantha," Vivian purred. "I hear we have some things to discuss." Samantha's heart pounded as Vivian's cool smile settled on her. She looked as flawless as ever, dressed in a designer coat, her hair immaculately styled, and that same aura of confidence radiating off her. It felt like stepping into a nightmare, one she had thought she'd escaped when Jonathan left her standing alone in that hotel room all those years ago. "What are you doing here?" Samantha asked, keeping her voice low so the boys, who were playing a few feet away, wouldn't hear. Vivian tilted her head, looking amused. "Isn't it obvious?" She glanced at Jonathan, her expression softening as she linked her arm with his. "We're going to be a family, Samantha." Samantha's stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" "We're getting married," Vivian said, as if the words were perfectly reasonable, as if they didn't rip Samantha apart. And Jonathan and I want to make sure that these little ones are part of our lives. The implication hung heavy in the air. Our lives, our family. They're not yours, Samantha shot back, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. You have no right to. Actually, we do, Vivian interrupted, her voice silky smooth. Jonathan is their father, and as his wife, I'll be, well, I guess you could call me their stepmother. Samantha felt her world tilting. How could this be happening? She had thought that Jonathan's reappearance would be her biggest challenge, but now Vivian was here, twisting the knife deeper. You're not their mother, Samantha spat, struggling to keep her composure. You will never be their mother. Vivian's smile widened. No, I suppose not. But I'll be in their lives, whether you like it or not. Jonathan, who had remained silent until now, took a step forward, his gaze fixed on Samantha. We want to make this work, Samantha. For the boys. For the boys. The audacity of his words sent a rush of anger through her. She had spent the last 3 years struggling, scraping by to give her children the best life she could. And now Jonathan was trying to waltz back in with his fiancée, acting like he could just take over. You can't just come back and decide to play house with my sons, she hissed, her eyes blazing. Our sons, Jonathan corrected softly. And I'm not going anywhere. Samantha stared at him, hating the way her heart tightened at the look in his eyes. The same look he used to give her when they were younger, when he made promises that she had foolishly believed. Please, Samantha, he murmured. Let's talk about this. I want to be in their lives. She took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. You can be in their lives, she said, her voice low but firm. But on my terms, not hers. Vivian's smile faltered, a flash of anger darkening her eyes. That's not for you to decide. Samantha's gaze never left Jonathan's. Yes, it is. Because I'm the one who's been here. I'm the one who's raised them. I'm the one they call mommy when they're sick or scared. Vivian opened her mouth to retort, but Jonathan put a hand on her arm, silencing her. He looked back at Samantha, his expression conflicted. I just want a chance, he whispered. Please. Samantha swallowed hard, the anger warring with something softer, something painful. She didn't trust him. Not yet. But the boys deserved to know their father. And deep down, a part of her, a small, fragile part, wanted to believe that he had changed. I'll think about it, she said finally, her voice tight. But you don't get to make demands. Not after what you did. Jonathan nodded slowly, relief washing over his face. Thank you. Vivian, however, looked furious. You can't be serious, Jonathan. She's trying to control everything. That's enough, Vivian, he said sharply, his eyes flashing. This is between Samantha and me. Samantha watched as Vivian's face twisted with anger, but she turned on her heel, striding back toward the car without another word. Jonathan lingered for a moment, his gaze still on Samantha. I meant what I said, he murmured. I want to do right by them. And then he turned, following Vivian, leaving Samantha standing alone once again. Samantha couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Vivian's face, smirking, victorious as if she had already won. She knew what this was. It wasn't just about the boys. It was about control, power. Vivian wanted to put Samantha in her place, to remind her of who Jonathan really belonged to. But Samantha wouldn't let her. The next morning, she called her lawyer. They had a long, tense conversation, going over every option, every possibility. By the time they hung up, Samantha was exhausted, but her resolve had hardened. She would fight for her boys, whatever it took. The first custody hearing was set for 2 weeks later. Samantha arrived at the courthouse early, her heart pounding. Jonathan was already there, looking tense but determined. And beside him, like a shadow, was Vivian. The hearing was brutal. Vivian's lawyer painted Samantha as an unfit mother, bringing up every struggle she'd faced, every mistake she'd made. They talked about her low income, her tiny apartment, the fact that she had no family support. It's clear that Ms. Blake is not providing these children with the life they deserve, the lawyer drawled, his tone dripping with disdain. Mr. Carter, on the other hand, can offer them stability, security, and a loving home. Samantha clenched her fists under the table. How dare they? How dare they judge her for doing her best, for making sacrifices Jonathan had never even considered? But then her lawyer stood up, his voice calm and steady. Ms. Blake has raised these boys on her own for the last 3 years. She has been their sole caregiver, their source of love and comfort. And despite her circumstances, she has never once asked Mr. Carter for help. She has provided for them to the best of her ability, and they are happy, healthy, and deeply loved. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the table. Samantha's heart ached as she watched him, torn between wanting him to understand and wanting him to hurt as much as she had. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, listened to both sides before leaning forward, her gaze piercing. "Ms. Blake," she said, her tone measured, "I'm inclined to believe that you are a good mother. But I also believe that children deserve to know both their parents if it's in their best interest. Are you willing to work with Mr. Carter to create a shared custody arrangement?" Samantha swallowed hard, her eyes darting to Jonathan. His expression was open, almost pleading. He looked different, not like the cold, distant man who had left her, but like the Jonathan she used to know. Slowly, she nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." Jonathan's shoulders sagged with relief, and for a moment, just a moment, Samantha let herself hope. Maybe this could work. Maybe they could find a way to be parents, if nothing else. But as she turned to leave, Vivian stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "You're making a mistake," she hissed, her eyes burning with hatred. "I will destroy you, Samantha. Mark my words." Samantha stared at her, shock giving way to a slow, simmering anger. "You can try," she whispered, "but I won't let you take my boys." And as she walked away, Samantha knew one thing for certain. The real fight was just beginning. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of confusion, tension, and uncertainty. The boys, too young to understand the intricacies of the custody arrangement, simply knew that suddenly they had a father who was a stranger but who looked just like them. Jonathan tried, Samantha had to admit. He picked them up every weekend, took them to the zoo, to sports games, to amusement parks. He made an effort to learn about their favorite things: Jesse's obsession with soccer, Jake's love for drawing, and Jack's fascination with numbers and puzzles. But no matter how hard he tried, there was always an undercurrent of awkwardness, a stiffness in his interactions that the boys picked up on. And every time Samantha watched him try to connect, a small part of her still felt that same sharp sting of betrayal. "I'm their father," he told her one evening as he dropped the boys off, his voice soft but firm. "They deserve to know me." "I know," Samantha replied, arms crossed protectively over her chest. "But they're confused, Jonathan. You can't just walk into their lives and expect them to accept you right away." His expression tightened. "What do you want me to do, Samantha?" "I'm doing everything I can. Be patient," she whispered, glancing over at the boys, who were sitting on the living room floor, completely absorbed in building a block tower. "And for God's sake, get Vivian out of the picture. She's confusing them even more." Jonathan's face hardened. "Vivian is my fiancée. She's going to be part of their lives, whether you like it or not." The words cut deep, and Samantha struggled to keep her expression neutral. "You're going to have to choose, Jonathan," she said quietly, "between making your fiancé happy and doing what's best for our sons." He stared at her, something like regret flickering in his eyes. But then he turned away, shaking his head. "I'm not choosing," he murmured. "I'll make it work." But Samantha knew better. Vivian was a ticking time bomb, and sooner or later, she would go off. It happened on a rainy Friday evening. Samantha was rushing to get the boys ready for Jonathan's weekend visitation, their little rain boots scattered across the floor as they tugged on their jackets. There was a knock on the door, and when Samantha opened it, she found Vivian standing there, dressed in a pristine white trench coat, an umbrella held over her head. "Where's Jonathan?" Samantha asked, her voice wary. "He's not coming," Vivian replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "He asked me to pick up the boys today." Samantha stiffened, her gaze darting to her sons, who had frozen at the sight of Vivian. Jesse took a step back, clutching Jack's arm, and Jake shrank behind Samantha's leg, peeking out at Vivian with wide eyes. "No," Samantha said firmly. "You're not taking them." Vivian's eyes narrowed. I'm not asking for your permission, Samantha. Samantha squared her shoulders, blocking Vivian's path. Get out of my house. You think you can keep me out of their lives forever? Vivian spat, her face twisting with anger. I'm going to be their stepmother. They will be part of my family. No, they won't, Samantha retorted. Because they're my family, and I'm not going to let you manipulate Jonathan into. That's rich coming from you, Vivian sneered. You think you can just dangle these kids in front of him, and he'll forget about me, about us? Jonathan and I are getting married, and when we do, I'm going to make sure you never get another penny of his money. The accusation stunned Samantha into silence. She had never asked for money. She had never taken a single cent from Jonathan. Not when she was pregnant, not after the boys were born. The very idea that she would use her children for leverage made her blood boil. This isn't about money, Samantha ground out, fighting to keep her voice steady. This is about what's best for the boys, and what's best is for you to stay away from them. Vivian's lips curled into a cold smile. You don't get it, do you? You're going to lose. Jonathan's going to realize that I'm the only one who really cares about his future, about our future. And when he does, he'll take those boys away from you. Over my dead body, Samantha whispered. Vivian's smile widened. That can be arranged. Before Samantha could respond, there was a sudden cry from behind her. She spun around to see Jesse staring up at Vivian, his little face crumpling. Go away, he shouted, his voice high and shrill. You're mean. I don't like you. Samantha reached out, but he was already running toward his brothers, his eyes wet with tears. Vivian's smile vanished, her eyes narrowing into slits. You little... Leave, Samantha said, stepping between her and the boys. Now. For a moment, they stood there, the tension thick and crackling. Then, with a toss of her hair, Vivian turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Samantha let out a shaky breath, her heart racing. She knelt down, pulling the boys into her arms, holding them tight as they trembled against her. It's okay, babies, she whispered, stroking their hair. Mommy's here. Mommy's got you. But as she sat there, cradling her sons, a single, terrifying thought lodged itself in her mind. Vivian wasn't going to stop, and Samantha wasn't sure she could protect her boys from whatever was coming next. Jonathan knew something was wrong the moment he stepped into his penthouse that night. The lights were off, the air thick with tension. Vivian was sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand, her expression icy. What's going on? He asked, shrugging off his coat. Where were you? She demanded, her voice tight. I had a meeting, he replied slowly. I thought I told you. You didn't tell me anything, she snapped. And I had to go pick up your kids like some kind of errand girl. Jonathan frowned. You went to Samantha's? Yes, I went to Samantha's, she said, her voice rising. Because you didn't show up? I had to stand there and listen to her tell me I'm not welcome in their life. I had to watch that little brat scream at me like I was some kind of monster. Vivian, calm down, Jonathan murmured, holding up his hands. They're just kids. They don't understand. They don't understand because you won't let me be part of their lives, she shouted, jumping to her feet. You let her push me out, Jonathan. You're letting her win. Win? He repeated, his voice incredulous. This isn't a game, Vivian. Those are my sons. And what am I? She hissed, her eyes blazing. Just a placeholder? Just someone to keep your bed warm until you decide you want to play daddy? Vivian, stop, he said sharply. This isn't about you. It's about them. No, Jonathan, she whispered, stepping closer, her gaze dark and dangerous. It's about us. And if you don't make a decision soon, you're going to lose me for good. He stared at her, his heart pounding. He loved Vivian. He did. But the boys, they were his flesh and blood. They were innocent in all of this, caught in a tug of war they didn't deserve. I can't walk away from them, he said softly. Not again. Vivian's face twisted with rage. She threw her glass at the wall, the shattering sound echoing through the empty penthouse. Fine, she spat. But don't come crying to me when she takes everything. And then she was gone, slamming the door behind her, leaving Jonathan standing alone in the dark. The custody battle raged on for months, wearing Samantha down little by little. Every time she walked into that courtroom, she braced herself for another attack. Another attempt by Vivian's lawyer to paint her as an unfit mother. But no matter how hard they tried, Samantha stood her ground, refusing to be bullied or intimidated. Jonathan, torn between his love for his sons and his crumbling relationship with Vivian, tried to play peacemaker. He assured Samantha over and over that he wanted what was best for the boys. But his actions, showing up late for visitations, missing important milestones, told a different story. Then one day, everything changed. It was a sunny afternoon when Samantha received an unexpected call from her lawyer. Vivian had filed for full custody, not Jonathan Vivian. She was claiming that Samantha was emotionally unstable and that the boys would be better off living with Jonathan and her. The audacity of it left Samantha speechless. She can't do that, can she? Samantha whispered, clutching the phone. She's not even their mother. No, but she's trying to use her influence and wealth to sway the judge. Her lawyer replied grimly. We need to prepare for the worst. The next hearing was a blur. Samantha sat in stunned silence as Vivian's lawyer laid out their case, twisting every detail of Samantha's life into something ugly and dangerous. They argued that Samantha's refusal to let Vivian be part of the boys' lives was damaging, that she was poisoning them against their father and his new fiancé. Samantha's heart pounded as she listened, her gaze darting to Jonathan. He looked miserable, his eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't agree with any of it. She knew that. But he didn't speak up. He didn't defend her. He just sat there, letting Vivian tear her apart. And that was when Samantha realized something. Jonathan would never change. He was weak, too afraid of losing Vivian to do what was right. He would let her destroy Samantha if it meant keeping his relationship intact. But Samantha wasn't weak, and she wasn't going to let them take her sons. When it was her turn to speak, Samantha stood, her voice steady and clear. She talked about the boys, their personalities, their dreams, the way they laughed together every night before bed. She talked about the sacrifices she had made, the love and care she had given them, and the life she had built for them, all on her own. I'm not perfect, she said softly, looking directly at Jonathan. But I love my children more than anything, and I will fight for them until my last breath. The room fell silent. The judge watched her for a long moment before turning to Jonathan. Mr. Carter, do you support your fiancé's petition for full custody? She asked sharply. Jonathan's head snapped up, his eyes wide. What? He stammered. Do you believe that your fiancé should have more say over your children than their mother? The judge repeated, her voice firm. Jonathan looked between Vivian, who was glaring daggers at him, and Samantha, who stood tall and unbroken. Slowly, he shook his head. No, he whispered. I don't. Vivian's face twisted with fury. Jonathan, you can't. I'm sorry, Vivian, he said softly. But this is wrong. The judge nodded, her gaze returning to Samantha. I believe you, Miss Blake. Your children are lucky to have such a strong, dedicated mother. And just like that, the nightmare was over. Vivian stormed out of the courthouse that day, her plans shattered. She and Jonathan broke up soon after, their engagement crumbling under the weight of bitterness and resentment. Without Vivian's influence, Jonathan stepped back, agreeing to a much smaller custody arrangement, weekend visits, supervised at first until the boys were comfortable enough to spend more time with him. Samantha took it day by day, slowly learning to trust him again. Not as a partner, but as a father to their sons. He tried harder, made more of an effort, and as the months passed, the boys began to look forward to their weekends with him. But the scars ran deep. It would take time, years perhaps, for the wounds to fully heal. Samantha knew that, and she knew Jonathan would never truly be part of their family, not the way she and the boys were. But that was okay, because she had one. She had fought for her children and for herself, and she had come out stronger. One evening, as she tucked the boys into bed, Jack looked up at her, his blue eyes serious. Mommy, he whispered, is Daddy going to come back? Samantha's heart tightened. She knelt beside his bed, brushing a lock of hair away from his forehead. He's always going to be your daddy, sweetheart, she murmured. But he's not coming back to live with us, no? Jack nodded slowly, his little brow furrowing. "That's okay," he said finally. "'Cause we have you." Samantha smiled, her heart swelling with love. "Yes, you do," she whispered. "You always will." And as she turned off the light and slipped out of the room, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The battle was over. The pain, the betrayal, it was all behind her now. She and her boys were finally free. Years passed. The boys grew up happy and healthy, thriving in the small but warm home Samantha had built for them. Jonathan remained a part of their lives, albeit a distant one, more of a visitor than a father figure. He had remarried eventually, but it was clear that Samantha and the boys were never far from his thoughts. Samantha, for her part, moved on. She focused on her career, her family, and the life she had created. She started her own business, a small marketing firm that quickly gained a reputation for its integrity and creativity. She dated a few men, but none of them ever filled the void Jonathan had left. But she was okay with that. One sunny afternoon, Samantha stood at the edge of a soccer field, watching Jesse sprint across the grass, his face lit up with excitement. Beside her, Jake and Jack cheered him on, their voices mingling with the roar of the crowd. For the first time in a long time, Samantha felt content, complete. She had fought, she had lost and won, broken and rebuilt herself. And in the end, she had found something even better than what she had lost: peace, strength, and a future filled with hope. As the boys ran toward her, their faces flushed with happiness, Samantha smiled, opening her arms wide, because this love, this family, was all she had ever needed. Samantha's story is one of resilience, strength, and the fierce love of a mother determined to protect her children from heartbreak and betrayal. Through a grueling custody battle and ultimate triumph, Samantha never gave up on herself or her boys. Despite Jonathan's abandonment and Vivian's cruel attempts to tear her family apart, Samantha proved that true strength comes from within and that no amount of wealth or power can ever replace a mother's love. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the story. I'm sure the next video appearing on your screen will also move you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos. A big kiss and see you in the next story.